Hello everyone, welcome. Today we're reviewing the skeletal system for those of you that are taking the ATI TEAS exam or the HESI A2 exam. So starting off with the main functions of bone. They create a frame for the body and give it shape. They protect soft vulnerable organs inside the body. For example, the vertebral column protects the spinal nerves, the skull protects the brain, and the ribs protect the heart and the lungs. The bones also work as a lever to produce movement. They also store calcium and produce red blood cells. There are two ways to classify bones. One way is by their shape. The long bone is, you guessed it, long. It makes up most of the bones in the arms and the legs, like the humerus, the ulna, fibula, and tibia. Long bones facilitate movement and supports our body weight. So I do encourage you to take a screenshot on whatever device you're using, whether it's a phone or a laptop, because the bones seen here in this image are very common and there's a good chance that you could have them on your exam. So take a screenshot if you can. Next, we have the short bones, and you guessed it, they're short. They are equal in length as they are to their width, so they look similar to a cube shape. They're mostly found in the wrists and the ankles as shown in the photo, and they provide stability and movement. Tarsals and carpals are extremely important to remember. So remember, the carpals are the bones on the wrists and the tarsals are the bones on the ankles. Next, we have the flat bones. They're thin, they can be curved or flat. They are found in the ribs, cranial bones, and the sternum. They protect internal organs like a shield. In the photo, you can see all the flat bones, so make sure you take a screenshot. Next, we have our irregular bones. These are odd shaped like a puzzle piece, and they pretty much just don't fit in the characteristic traits of any other type of bone. So these are your hip bones, your vertebrae, and your sacrum. Okay, so we can classify bones by their shape. We have long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones. Now, let's look at the second way that we can classify bones, and this is by the type of tissue. Bone tissue is described either as a compact bone or a spongy bone. Compact bone is dense and hard tissue. It's found on the outer shaft of long bones. This hard material forms osteons, or you can also say that osteons form the hard material of compact bone. The osteons are also called haversian systems. The osteons are these round tubular things here. Within the center of each osteon, there's this central canal. This is where the blood vessels, the nerves, and the lymph vessels run through. So this is how they provide nutrients to the bone. It's also important to know that there are osteocytes found here on the osteons. So osteocytes are mature bone cells that maintain bone tissue. Let's look at the spongy bone now. Spongy bone is porous, kind of like a kitchen sponge. It does not have osteons like the compact bone, but instead it has trabeculae. Trabeculae are pieces of tissue that irregularly lay on top of each other, creating these pores. The pores, or the holes in the bone, help make the bone lighter in weight and provide space for the bone marrow. Spongy bone is found at the epiphyses of long bone, and it lines the medullary cavity. So let's review. There are two types of bone tissue. One is the compact bone and the other is the spongy bone. Make note that the compact bone can be identified because of the osteons, and the spongy bone can be identified because it looks porous like a sponge made from trabeculae. Okay, let's look at a few photos of bone and go over the structures you need to be familiar with. First, you need to know the difference between spongy bone and compact bone, seen here and here, which we've already gone over. Next, we have the diaphyses and epiphyses. The diaphyses is describing the long part of the bone, and the epiphyses is describing the ends of the bone. Next, we have the trabeculae. These are the tissue that make up spongy bone, and they're arranged overlapping each other and create these holes in the spongy bone. Next, we have osteons. Many osteons make up the compact bone, and it is not shown here, but we also have the central canal, which is the opening in the center of each osteon where blood vessels, lymph vessels, and nerves go through. Next, we have the yellow bone marrow and red bone marrow. Yellow marrow stores fat, and it's found in the medullary cavity in the center of long bones. Red marrow makes blood cells, and it's found in the spongy bone. Next, we have the medullary cavity. This encloses the bone marrow, and it's found in the diaphyses, or the center of the long area of the bone. Lastly, we have the Epiphysia line, also known as the growth plate. This is a thin band of cartilage tissue that represents where the growth of a long bone takes place. As kids grow, the plates harden into solid bone. Growth plates close near the end of puberty, and at this stage, the bone itself no longer grows in length. However, the bone is still able to grow in width. And you might be wondering what makes the bone grow width-wise, right? Well, exercise does. Especially weight-bearing exercise like squatting or deadlifting or lifting any type of weight. This can stimulate bone growth and overall strengthen your bones and make them grow bigger width-wise, but not length-wise, right? Because what determines your bones growing length-wise long is that epiphyseal line, that growth plate. So those are all the structures of a long bone that you should be familiar with. We've touched on bone marrow and where it's found, but I want to look at it one more time because it's super important. Red bone marrow is found in the spongy tissue, which is at the end of long bones, otherwise known as your epiphyses, and the center of all other bones. Red bone marrow makes blood cells, including red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Yellow bone marrow is found in the medullary cavity, which is in the long diaphyses section of a long bone, and it stores fat. Here's another image of a bone where you can see the medullary cavity here in the center of the bone, otherwise known as the diaphyses. And notice there is yellow marrow here. And at the end of the bone, the epiphyses, there's spongy bone, and within the spongy bone, there's red bone marrow. Next, let's go over types of bone cells. Osteoblasts remove calcium from the blood and deposit it into the bone. They are the bone builders. Osteocytes are derived from osteoblasts. They are mature bone cells. Osteocytes are the most abundant bone cells, and they maintain bone matrix. So how do these osteocytes come from osteoblasts? Well, as an osteoblast forms bone, the surrounding area becomes hard and calcified, and eventually the osteoblast is embedded and stuck in the bone matrix. At this point, it's called an osteocyte, and it will permanently stay in there, maintaining the integrity of the bone. Lastly, we have osteoclasts. These break calcium from bone and deposit it into the blood as needed. These are known as the bone breakers. So we have the bone makers and we have the bone breakers. Let's talk about calcium storage. Most of the bone material is made of some form of calcium. Calcium is needed for muscle contraction, conduction of nerve impulses, and blood clotting, just to name a few examples. 99% of calcium is stored in the teeth and in the bones. So calcium is always in one of two places. It's either being stored or it's being used, in which this case it's going to be circulating in the blood. So there needs to be a balance of calcium in the blood at all times. If there is too much calcium in the blood, it's going to cause problems. And if there's too little calcium in the blood, it's also going to cause problems. So calcium needs to be balanced in the blood, and it's always going to be removed and added in order to maintain this homeostasis. So if blood calcium levels are too low, osteoclast cells will break up the stored calcium in the bones and take it to the blood where it's needed. And this, of course, will raise blood calcium levels to an appropriate level. If calcium in the blood is too high, osteoblast cells will take the excess calcium from the blood and store it in the bones. So lastly, let's look at 3 common hormones that will change calcium levels in the blood, starting off with those that increase calcium levels in the blood. Vitamin D, also known as calcitrol. So calcitrol is the man-made bioactive vitamin D. Vitamin D increases absorption of calcium in the small intestines. And where does this calcium go? It goes straight into the blood. So it raises calcium levels in the blood. PTH, or parathyroid hormone, also increases calcium in the blood by increasing the quantity and the activity of osteoclasts. Now, which hormone decreases calcium in the blood? Calcitonin, right. Calcitonin is secreted by the thyroid. It inhibits the activity of osteoclasts and it promotes the activity of osteoblasts. So vitamin D and PTH both have the ability of increasing blood calcium levels, and calcitonin decreases blood calcium levels. That's it for this video. I hope you learned something new, and until next time.